December 15th, 1944. The Ardennes forest didn't sound like a battlefield. Not yet. It was quiet, too quiet, men said. Snow drifted lazily between the pine branches, settling in soft blankets that muffled every footstep, every breath, every doubt. On a ridgeline overlooking the village of Lance, 12 Americans lay hidden in shallow foxholes hacked into the frozen soil. They were the 394th Intelligence and Reconnaissance Platoon, attached to the 99th Infantry Division. But every soldier in the unit knew the truth. They weren't fighters. They were observers, scouts, intelligence gatherers. They were never meant to hold a front line. Lieutenant Lyle Bouck, 20 years old and already a veteran of more responsibility than he wanted, crawled along the ridge to check on his men. Frost clung to his eyebrows. His breath came out as steam. "Keep your helmets low," he murmured. "If anything moves out there, I want to know before they do." The platoon had been ordered to watch the Belgian border for signs of German patrols. High command believed the enemy was exhausted, retreating, broken. This sector, thinly held, poorly supplied, was considered quiet. Bouck didn't like quiet. Quiet meant someone was planning something. He checked on SGT William Sakanikas, the platoon's most steady marksman, a dark-eyed soldier whose rifle almost seemed like an extension of his arms. "You think we'll see anything tonight?" Sakanikas asked. Bouck shook his head. "I hope not, but my gut's turning. Something's off." Bouck had reason to worry. Unbeknownst to him, a force unlike anything the Allies had seen since Normandy was gathering in the forests east of their position, far beyond the ridge. Inside a camouflage tent warmed by nothing but body heat and adrenaline, SS Oberstgruppenführer Sepp Dietrich breathed heavily over a set of maps. The 6th Panzer Army, Hitler's elite armored fist, waited for his order. The Ardennes offensive, what the Allies would come to call the Battle of the Bulge, was hours away. Dietrich jabbed his finger at a narrow road winding toward Lans. The same village the 394th I&R Platoon unknowingly watched over. "This is our gateway," he growled. "This route must be taken by morning. No delays." His staff officers nodded grimly. Leading the opening thrust was the 3rd Fallschirmjäger Division, veteran paratroopers followed by the armor of the Panzer divisions. Their orders: penetrate the American line, secure the roads, drive straight to the Meuse River, splitting the Allied forces in two. The plan depended on speed, surprise, overwhelming force, and in front of their chosen route, a handful of American scouts lying in the snow. Dietrich didn't even consider them an obstacle. Bouck's men tried to warm their hands by rubbing them together beneath their wool gloves. The snow came in thin sheets. The air smelled of pine resin and cold metal. PFC Sam Jenkins, a wiry Texan who never stopped cracking jokes, whispered, "You know, Lieutenant, if the Germans do come through this sector, they better bring a mountain of blankets. That's the only thing that's gonna scare me right now." Bouck smirked, but only slightly. The men depended on humor to ignore the cold. The truth was, most of these scouts weren't trained infantry. They were analysts, map readers, intelligence collectorsmen selected for their brains, not their firepower. But Bouck had drilled them hard. They knew how to shoot, how to coordinate fields of fire, how to disappear into terrain. Even so, they were 12. Behind them, no reinforcements. Ahead of them, something was coming. At 3 o'clock, Sakanikas stiffened. "Movement," he whispered. "Multiple shadows." East line. Bouck slid beside him, raising his binoculars. At first, he saw nothing. Then a flicker, then another. Shapes, human shapes, marching. Soft at first, like leaves brushing together, but growing louder. Boots crunching in synchronized rhythm. The distant metallic clatter of equipment. Bouck's stomach dropped. There weren't a few men coming. There were hundreds. He lowered the binoculars and whispered, voice tight, "Everyone up. Quiet. Safety off." The enemy column emerged fully, now long, dark lines marching through the snow. Not a patrol, not a platoon, a German battalion. Bouck's men stared in disbelief. Sakanikas whispered, "Sir, are we seeing that right?" Bouck didn't answer. His mind raced. 12 Americans, facing hundreds of elite German paratroopers, and behind them, Dietrich's armored fist. Their orders were to observe, not engage. But if they let that column pass uncontested, the entire US 99th and 2nd Divisions could be overrun before sunrise. Bouck inhaled cold air, filling his chest until it hurt. "We make a stand," he whispered. "We hold as long as we can, enough to warn command." Sakanikas blinked. "Sir, that's suicide." Bouck nodded. But it's our job. The Germans advanced closer, shadows in the fog, rifles slung, confident, certain of an easy breakthrough. They had no idea 12 Americans watched them from the trees, or that in minutes the smallest U.S. patrol on the entire front line would start a fight that would delay the German war machine long enough to change the course of the offensive. Bouck raised his hand. Wait. The boots got louder. The Germans were right beneath their ridge. Bouck dropped his hand. Fire. The ridge exploded to life. 12 rifles opened fire in perfect, disciplined volley, sharp cracks echoing through the frigid air. German soldiers in the column below staggered, fell, or dove for cover as chaos rippled through their ranks. For a full second, no one knew what was happening. American bullets snapped through tree branches, kicked up snow, shattered the stillness the Germans believed protected them. The lead company broke apart like glass hitting stone. Lt. Lyle Bouck shouted over the gunfire, short bursts. Make them think we're a company, maybe a battalion. His men obeyed methodical, controlled fire, nothing sloppy. Every shot looked like it came from a larger, coordinated force. Below them, German paratroopers scrambled in the dark. Oberleutnant Hans Wenner, leading the forward element of the 9th Fallschirmjäger Regiment, hit the deck as bullets screamed overhead. Snow exploded near his face. What in God's name? His radio man crawled beside him. Herr Oberleutnant, we are taking fire from the ridge. Wenner whipped around. That cannot be Americans, they have no units here of strength. Yet the volume of gunfire suggested otherwise. It was steady, professional, disciplined, not the panicked shooting of an outpost. Not a retreating screen. It felt like running into a full defensive line. But that made no sense. The sector was supposed to be held by scattered infantry, nothing more. Wenner shouted to his sergeants, deploy smoke, machine guns up, find their flanks. His men reacted instantly, but every movement was hit by another precise burst from the unseen. Americans above. 2 MG-42 crews ran forward, setting up behind a fallen tree boat before they could squeeze a trigger. Sokonikas picked them off one by one. Wenner's frustration grew. Why can't we see them? Where are they firing from? The fog, the darkness, the ridge angle, everything favored the Americans, but the Germans didn't know that. They only knew someone on that ridge was killing their men with terrifying efficiency. Bouck crawled between positions, his breath ragged in the cold. Keep spacing. No silhouettes. Fire only when you see movement. The men were calm, shockingly calm for facing a battalion. SGT Sakanik fired 3 precise shots and whispered, "That's 5 for me." "Save your ammo," Bouck warned. "This won't be over quick." Jenkins, hands shaking but still courageous, fired downward, then ducked. "Lieutenant, there's too many." "I know," Bouck said, "but they don't." Below, the Germans continued shouting orders, their voices breaking under the stress. The Americans were invisible, and every muzzle flash seemed deliberate, calculated. The illusion grew. 12 men were now fighting like an entire company. Across the valley, Cole, Friedrich Kussner, commanding elements of the 3rd Fallschirmjäger Division, heard the gunfire long before he saw the smoke. He stopped, listening carefully. That wasn't a skirmish. That was a firefight. He turned to his staff officer. "Have our forward scouts met the American 2nd Division already?" "No, Herr Oberstleutnant. Intelligence reports the enemy here is thin." "Impossible. That fire is coordinated. That's no reconnaissance patrol." He pressed his lips together. Could the Allies have anticipated the attack? Had Dietrich's timetable been compromised? Every second mattered. If the infantry was delayed, the tanks would bottleneck behind them. He barked an order. Push the regiment forward. Clear that ridge at once. But inside, something gnawed at him. This shouldn't be happening. Not here. Not now. He had no idea that he was committing more and more men against 12 American scouts. Bouck's men poured fire downslope as German groups attempted to move up the hill. Snow kicked up around them as bullets from MP-40s and Kar 98Ks whipped past. Reloading, Jenkins shouted, covering fire. Sakanikas responded, dropping 2 more Germans trying to rush the base of the ridge. Bouck slid beside Preston Sims, who had set up a bar on a mound of snow, the barrel steaming in the cold. "You're good?" Bouck asked. Sims exhaled hard. "I'm good, sir, but they're regrouping." Bouck looked down the ridge and saw it too. The Germans were adapting, shifting into formations, spreading out, trying to flank. "They're testing us," Bouck said quietly. Sims swallowed. "What happens when they stop testing and start charging?" Bouck didn't answer. He couldn't. Oberleutnant Wenner regrouped his men behind a stand of pine trees. Americans on the ridge. They have machine guns and rifles in dug-in positions. A sergeant replied, Herr Oberleutnant, they must have a platoon, maybe two. Wenner clenched his jaw. Then why don't we hear their heavier weapons? They may be holding them for when we advance, Wenner cursed. The Americans were invisible ghosts with perfect angles. Call for mortar, he ordered. His radio man hesitated. We have no frequency contact. Jamming from the forest. That wasn't jamming, it was terrain. But Wenner didn't know that. He believed the Americans were interfering. Another illusion of strength, then dash crack. Crack, crack, crack. Sokonikas's rifle sent 3 carefully timed shots. German soldiers dropped in the snow. Wenner ducked. They're everywhere. Their positions stretch across the ridge. He was wrong. The firing pattern spread out by Bouck's orders made. 12 shooters sound like dozens, and that thought spread through the German ranks like poison. As dawn crept toward the horizon, fog thickened, snow swirled, the battlefield vanished into a gray void. Bouck peered through binoculars and whispered, They're hesitating, they're scared. He knew the truth. Fear was a weapon, confusion was a weapon, angles were a weapon. And the Germans were now fighting an enemy they couldn't see, couldn't pin down, and couldn't outmaneuver. Bouck's platoon had become a phantom battalion. The real German battalion below now faced an opponent they believed far outnumbered them, and the Germans were about to make the situation even worse for themselves, because their next move would trigger the most extraordinary bluff of the entire Battle of the Bulge. The fog thickened until the ridge dissolved into a curtain of shifting gray. It moved like smoke, swallowing sound and shape, making every tree trunk look like a man and every shadow look like a massing force. Lieutenant Lyle Bouck wiped melting frost from his eyelashes as another burst of German gunfire tore into the snowbank near his foxhole. He dropped back, heart hammering. Keep low, he whispered harshly. They're testing our positions again. A few foxholes down, SGT Sokonikas fired a single, perfectly placed round that cracked through the trees and dropped a German officer who was trying to direct his men forward. That's it, Bouck said. Make them think we have snipers everywhere. Sokonikas grinned. We do, sir, just one at a time. Below the ridge, the German line stalled again. Bodies lay in contorted angles in the snow. Soldiers crawled behind logs. Some froze mid-movement, unsure whether to advance or retreat. The Americans, just 12 scouts, had achieved something almost unthinkable. They had stopped a German battalion, but stopping them was only the beginning. Oberleutnant Hans Wenner pressed his back against a pine tree, chest heaving, snow melting on his face. His company had taken more casualties in 20 minutes than in their last 2 months combined. He grabbed the sleeve of his radioman. Tell Battalion HQ we are engaged with heavy American forces. But Herr Oberleutnant, do IT? The radioman slipped behind cover, fumbling with his set. But deep forest, ice, and hills interfered. He caught a signal, barely static, noise, faint voices. Finally, Wenner heard a reply. Repeat, forward element. You say heavy US forces? Yes, Wenner barked. At least a company, possibly more. This was false. All of it. But Wenner had enough evidence, dead men, precision fire, an unseen enemy to believe it. His commander, Lt. Cole, Friedrich Kussner, was equally stunned when the report arrived. A company, he muttered. Here, impossible. Another report arrived seconds later, then another. And another. Each exaggerated the strength of the Americans because each German officer assumed someone else was seeing more than they were. By the time the information reached regimental HQ, the story had grown. U.S. infantry in fortified positions, several machine guns, sniper teams, possible armored support. None of it was real. Fog, fear, and the Americans' perfectly timed firing patterns had created the illusion of a much larger force. Kussner slammed his fist on the table. Forward elements are pinned. Mobilize support companies now. He committed more, men hundreds more, and Bouck's 12 scouts were still firing. Bouck crawled through the snow to Jenkins's foxhole. They're regrouping again, Jenkins whispered. His breath trembled in the cold. Sir, how many do you think there are? Too many, Bouck said honestly. Bouck risked a glance over the ridge. Through the fog, he saw shapes, dark masses of German infantry forming up for another push, stretching back farther than the eye could see. At least 500 soldiers, maybe more. Bouck ducked back down. He needed to send a report, but earlier radio checks had failed. Their small -300 Seychelles rupees was struggling through the forested terrain. He turned to PFC Sam Jenkins. Try again, keep trying. Jenkins nodded, twisting the dials, tapping the set. Static noise. Nothing, no help was coming. No reinforcements. No artillery support. The platoon was alone. Bouck clenched his fists. We have to buy time. Whatever it takes. The Germans prepared for a full assault. When I shouted orders, grenadiers forward, machine guns covering, mortar teams stand by. Bouck saw movement down the slope. German soldiers creeping up in staggered lines. Rifles ready. Let them come closer. Bouck whispered. Make them think we want them here. His men did not flinch. Not one. When the Germans crossed the halfway mark up the ridge, Bouck shouted, NOW. 12 rifles roared. The bar thundered. Snow burst like shrapnel. Germans dived back, some slipping, some falling as their attack crumbled. Succanicus whispered, they're pulling back again. They think we're dug in deep. Bouck shook his head. No, they think we're many. Kussner received the latest frantic report. The Americans hadn't broken, they'd repelled the attack again. How many casualties? He asked. A captain hesitated. Dozens. Sir Kussner's face drained of color. Dozens. Against a reconnaissance force. No, sir. We believe we are facing the captain looked uncertain, afraid to say the words. A battalion-sized defensive position. Kussner slammed his map shut. This entire sector is compromised. We must clear that ridge or the timetable is destroyed. Bring up more infantry. The German army, the mighty Fallschirmjäger, were now mobilizing company after company against 12 Americans. Fear had warped reality. Every dead German suggested a larger enemy. Every precise shot convinced commanders of snipers and machine gun nests. Fog distorted perceptions of movement and numbers. Kussner made the decision that sealed Germany's fate for the day. Commit the reserve battalion. Full force, 1,000 Germans, versus 12 men who were already running low on ammunition. Bouck saw shadows moving farther back, more organized, more numerous. They're pulling more units forward, he whispered. Succanicus frowned. A whole company. Bouck didn't answer. He couldn't. The number was far larger. Down below, a German runner sprinted through the fog, shouting orders. Columns shifted. Officers pointed at the ridge. Machine gun teams repositioned. The Germans were preparing a massive assault. An overwhelming assault. Bouck crawled foxhole to foxhole. We hold. Remember slow, disciplined fire. Make them doubt everything. His men nodded, but in their eyes, Bouck could see the fear. And beneath the fear, determination. They were ready to die here if it meant slowing the German advance. Bouck braced himself, because the next German attack would not be a probe. It would not be cautious. It would not be uncoordinated. It would be the full weight of a German infantry battalion charging against 12 Americans on a snowy ridge in the middle of nowhere, and one mistake or one slip would expose the truth. There was no battalion here, no company, no reinforcements. Just 12 scouts executing the greatest bluff the Ardennes would ever see. The forest went silent, not peaceful, silent, predatory, silent, a silence that meant the enemy was no longer confused, no longer probing. They were preparing to attack in force. That Lieutenant Lyle Bouck felt it before he saw it, a shift in the air, a tension in the ground, the kind of instinctual pressure that soldiers learn to trust. Eyes up, he murmured, they're coming. Through the fog, he saw them. Waves of German infantry forming in disciplined lines, paratroopers tightening their straps, squad leaders raising hands, MG-42 teams settling into flanking positions. SGT Succanicus watched the shapes multiply. Sir, that's not a company. No, Bouck whispered, it's the whole damn battalion. The Germans were finally committing everything. Oberleutnant Hans Wenner steeled himself. Despite casualties and confusion, the orders were clear. Clear the ridge at all costs. He briefed his men quickly. We advance in 3 waves. Keep spacing. Do not stop until we overrun their line. One of his corporals swallowed nervously. Herr Oberleutnant, they shoot like they have dozens of snipers. Wenner grabbed a man's shoulder. Then we overwhelm them by numbers. But inside, Wenner felt dread. He had never faced an enemy he hadn't seen. The Germans advanced low at first, then picking up pace. Boots crunching in snow. Breath forming clouds. Shadows converging like a tide. Bouck raised his arm. WAIT. The Germans were halfway. Hold. 3/4. Hold. A German officer shouted. Vorwärts now. 12 rifles erupted. The bar thundered, sweeping across advancing squads. Grenades arced, exploding in white bursts of snow and pain. German soldiers screamed, fell, crawled for cover, but there was none. The ridge was a kill zone, and Bouck scouts had designed it with ruthless precision. Suckernikas dropped 5 men in quick succession. Sims fired until the bar barrel steamed. Jenkins emptied magazine after magazine. Beer, turning his hands into steel. The Germans shrank back again. Bouck's men had stopped 3 assaults. A mathematical impossibility, but impossibilities don't last forever. Bouck reloaded and felt the weight immediately. Low ammo, he shouted. Everyone sound off. 5 rounds. 3 mags left. Down to my last clip. Then Suckernikas said the words Bouck feared most. Sir, I'm empty. Bouck looked down the ridge. The Germans were reforming, and this time nothing would stop them. He had one option left. Not victory, but survival. Fall back, Bouck ordered. Into the farmyard move. The men scrambled from foxholes, sprinting through the snow toward a cluster of stone buildings behind the ridge. German troops surged forward at the sight of movement. They're retreating, Wenner shouted. Forward. Machine guns sprayed the ridge. Grenades detonated behind the Americans as they ran. Bouck turned briefly and fired a last burst to slow the advance. A bullet tore across his leg, sending him crashing into the snow. Sims grabbed him. Come on, Lieutenant, we're not leaving you. They dragged Bouck into the barn as German troops began surrounding the position. Inside, the platoon took cover, behind crates and farm tools, injured, bleeding, nearly out of ammunition. Bouck looked around at his exhausted men. This is it, he whispered. We held them as long as humanly possible. Then German voices shouted from outside. Amerikaner nicht schießen, Hund. Hohe. Bouck exchanged a confused look with Suck. They want us to stop firing, Suckernikas asked. Bouck blinked. They think we have more men. Through the broken barn window, Bouck saw them, hundreds of German soldiers, rifles raised cautiously, moving forward with hands half lowered as though expecting a last desperate ambush. They had lost too many men to believe the Americans were just 12. Some Germans looked terrified, others looked humiliated, but all of them moved slowly, unsure. A German sergeant approached, shaking visibly. Amerikaner, please. Surrender, he said in broken English. No more fighting. Bouck realized the truth. The Germans weren't trying to capture them with force, they were trying to avoid another slaughter. Bouck stepped out wounded, hands raised. Behind him, 11 men followed. Wenner stared at them in disbelief. This is impossible, he whispered. Where is the rest of your unit? Bouck met his eyes. You're looking at it. Wenner's face went pale. Round them, more than 300 German soldiers lowered their weapons, believing they had defeated a much larger American force. They had not. They had been fighting 12 men the entire time. For a moment, after Lieutenant Lyle Bouck uttered the words, "You're looking at it," silence clung to the ruined farmyard like frost. 12 wounded, exhausted American scouts stood in front of a force that outnumbered them by nearly 30 to 1. Snow drifted between them. The fog thinned, revealing the full scale of the German contingent now surrounding the barn. Oberleutnant and Hans Wenner stared back at Bouck, his breath visible in the cold air, his eyes wide with something between disbelief and awe. You are only 12, he asked. Bouck nodded once. Even lifting his chin hurt. The bullet wound in his leg burned like fire. A murmur rippled through the German ranks. Some shook their heads, some cursed softly, some simply stared at the Americans as though they were Wenner removed his helmet slowly. He fought like he struggled for the right word. Like a full company. Bouck didn't respond. He couldn't. His legs nearly gave out as German medics hurried forward, not with weapons, but with stretchers. Wenner raised a hand. Treat their wounded immediately. It was a strange, fragile moment. Respect between enemies carved out of violence and cold. Further down the road, Karl Friedrich Kustner arrived just as German troops had begun organizing the American prisoners. He expected dozens of us soldiers, maybe 100, not 12. A captain approached him nervously. Herr Oberstleutnant, these are all of them. Kustner's jaw clenched. All this handful delayed an entire regiment. The captain nodded, and inflicted significant casualties, sir. Kustner rubbed his temples. His timetable was shattered. His regiment was behind schedule. Paratroopers were shaken, demoralized, and uncertain. But that wasn't what troubled him most. It was the realization that the German army once feared across Europe had been stalled by 12 determined Americans with rifles, shovels, and frozen courage. They fought well, Kussner whispered. Too well. Then, more quietly, they have cost us precious hours. Perhaps more than hours. The delay was beginning to ripple through the German offensive. Tanks were bottlenecking on narrow forest roads. Armor was stalled behind infantry that should have cleared the sector long ago. Commanders were confused, frustrated, doubting their intelligence. One small patrol had thrown sand into the gears of the entire 6th Panzer Army. Bouck and his men were escorted to a German field station for processing. They limped through the snow, some carried on stretchers, others leaning on each other. SGRT Sakanicus, his face pale from blood loss, whispered to Bouck. "Sir, think we bought them enough time?" Bouck swallowed hard. "I hope so." Every step sent pain shooting up his leg, but he kept walking, refusing assistance until he collapsed at the processing tent. A young German medic caught him. "Please," the medic said gently. "Sit." Bouck did and finally let himself feel the exhaustion of the past hours. His men were alive, though barely. Jenkins had taken shrapnel, Sims had a broken collarbone, 2 others were concussed, but against all expectations none of them had died. 12 men had faced over 500 Germans. 12 men had inflicted dozens of casualties. 12 men had stalled the beginning of the Ardennes offensive by nearly 12 hours, and now, in captivity, they sat quietly, processing what had happened. Bouck stared into the snow. He wondered if anyone on the American side even knew what they had done. Would anyone know they had fought? Would anyone understand why? Would anyone care? Later that evening, Wenner visited Bouck inside the prisoner tent. Lantern light flickered across canvas walls. He pulled up a crate and sat across from the American lieutenant. "You fought well," he said simply. Bouck nodded, too tired to respond. Wenner continued. "Your resistance delayed us greatly. The road is clogged now. Vehicles cannot move. Our tanks are hours behind." Bouck looked up sharply. How many hours? Too many. For the Germans it meant the offensive was losing its precision. For Bouck, it meant hope. "We thought you were many," Wenner admitted. "We believed we faced entrenched infantry, perhaps a battalion." Bouck exhaled softly. "That was the idea." Wenner smiled faintly. "You succeeded. More than you know." They sat in silence for a long moment, two soldiers on opposite sides of a war, bound by respect forged in gunfire. When Wenner stood to leave, he paused. "For what it is worth," he said, "I will tell my superiors that your men fought with honor." The 394th I&R Platoon remained prisoners until the war's end, when Allied forces liberated German camps. In 1945, Bouck's men were found emaciated, frostbitten, dehydrated, but alive. They were debriefed immediately. American intelligence officers listened, stunned, as Bouck described how 12 men had held off a battalion. Some officers initially refused to believe him until after action German reports corroborated every detail. But bureaucracy moved slowly, paperwork got lost, commands changed hands. Recognition for their extraordinary stand didn't come for decades. It wasn't until 1981, 37 years after the battle, that Bouck and his men finally received the honors they deserved. Lyle Bouck Distinguished Service Cross SGT, William Sakanicas Silver Star. Several men received the Bronze Star and Purple Heart. Their unit became the most decorated American platoon of the entire Battle of the Bulge. Bouck, older now, accepted the medal quietly. He had lived a long life keeping the memories of that ridge tucked away, memories of fear, leadership, sacrifice, and impossible courage. And when historians later studied the German archives, they confirmed something remarkable. The platoon's stand delayed the German advance long enough for the U.S. 99th and 2nd Infantry Divisions to reposition, preventing a total collapse of the northern front. 12 men, armed with nothing but rifles and sheer will, had altered the shape of the most desperate German offensive of the war. In the Ardennes, history often remembers the divisions, the generals, the armor, the grand strategies, but on one ridge, in one forgotten corner of Belgium, the fate of thousands hinged on 12 men who refused to break. Their stand was not expected, their victory was not possible, and yet they made their mark on history, not by surviving the impossible, but by defying it.